This week's parsha is Parshat Shemini. This Dvar Torah is based on a Dvar Torah I heard from Rav Bernstein in his 2019 shiur online. And we know that Chumash Vayikra is really talking about the avoda, right? The avoda of the Mishkan and the Korbanot and etc. And there are very few episodes that recount what happened to the Jewish people between Yetziat Mitzrayim and entering Eretz Yisrael. That's not really what Chumash Vayikra is about. And yet there are some small episodes that we see that do recount what happened. And of course what we're talking about is the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. And now we'll quote the relevant psukim. We're in chapter 10, verse 1. The sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, each took his fire pan, and they put fire in them and placed incense upon it. And they brought before Hashem an alien fire that he had not commanded them. A fire came forth from before Hashem and consumed them, and they died before Hashem. Moses said to Aaron, "Of this did Hashem speak, saying, I will be sanctified through those who are nearest me, and thus I will be honored before the entire people." And Aaron was silent. Now, what just happened? Because we're introduced to this event, and things happen very quickly. We see that they did something wrong, right? That's the first pasuk. And then the second pasuk, we have the punishment. And then the third pasuk, we have the reflection, right? Bikrovai Ekadesh. But what is the meaning of this whole episode? So says the Meshech Chochmah that, there are many explanations in Chazal about what exactly Nadav and Avihu did wrong at this point, or what they had done wrong in the past that made them deserving of this punishment. But if we're to look at Pashup Pshat, if we're just to look at the psukim, it really doesn't seem, the pasuk doesn't seem to convey that what they did was so bad. It seems to be very mild. It's true, they did something that God hadn't commanded them, but it's not like they had explicitly violated the expressed will of Hashem, right? They didn't do anything that bad, and yet the punishment was so severe. What is going on? Because if we're to look at the first pasuk, we see they did something wrong. In the second pasuk, they did something very wrong. Then we look at the third pasuk, and Moshe calls them these amazing tzaddikim. What's happening? We're getting a very complicated picture here. And lastly, how does this relate to the opening of the Mishkan? And in order to understand that, we need to sort out what is the opening of the Mishkan about. Now, what it's about is, it's a celebration of the fact that the Jewish people had achieved fundamental and national atonement for their first national sin, for the Chet HaEgel, right? And this showed that they had recovered and received atonement for that sin. Now, says Meshech Chochmah, this first experience of receiving kapara was a very joyous time, but it's a very sensitive time, because it has serious possibility to be misunderstood and abused. Now, how is that? Because Kabbalah says, even though it's true, yes, the Jewish people had done something terribly wrong and they were in danger, but at the end of the day, they were okay. So now the question is, okay, well, how will the Jewish people relate to this concept of kapara? And as a second pointed question is, how will they relate to the idea of sin? Because the reality says they were in danger, and tshuva got them out of danger, right? And tshuva led to the kapara, and now they're okay. But it is possible to take advantage of the concept of tshuva, as if to say, I guess it really wasn't that serious to begin with, because at the end of the day, everything was fine, and that's the wrong way to look at things. And again, when a person goes through a process and everything turns out okay, it either meant it wasn't okay and then became okay, or it was always okay in the first place and it didn't really matter. But to think that second thought is confusing and replacing the concept of kapara for being a vatran, for being a vatranus, for vatranus. Now, what vatranus means is, it doesn't really make a difference if you do something wrong or not, because we did something wrong and everything's okay. So, in order to vouchsafe for the concept of kapara for all generations, you have to have something, even something relatively mild, that was met with swift retribution. Because that lets the Jewish people understand in no uncertain terms that if they violate Hashem's will, they're in trouble, and they are in danger. It's true that tshuva can help, but the danger is still lurking there. And the only way you can see that the danger is there is by some people who are almost like a korban now. Their lives are given in order to express this point absolutely clearly, that sin does bring about danger. And therefore we find Nadav and Avihu, and the way the pasuk describes the events, is at the end of the day what they did was pretty mild, it wasn't such a big deal, and yet punishment is swift and immediate and final. And what's amazing about this is that, when did this happen? It happened on the Hakamat of Mishkan, the first day of the Mishkan. V'yom Simchat Libo, the way the Midrash talks about it, and the way Tehillim speaks about it. It's the day of Hashem's joy. Generally, when a person is in a state of joy, they'll be much more forgiving. Okay, if you wrong me, you do something wrong, you break some of my kalim, right? Then, look, I'm happy. Who cares? At the end of the day, I remember, like a day after my daughter was born, someone actually hit my car, And like, look, at the end of the day, if that's the worst thing that happens, it's not such a big deal, so who cares? But really, and not only that, but who did this? We're talking about two of the biggest tzaddikim living at the time, Nadav and Avihu. These are Moshe's nephews, the sons of Aaron, the Kohanim, right? They're in part of Shevet Levi. They're at the center of people who are okay. And at the end of the day, it didn't make a difference. They were punished. And how did the Jewish people relate to this? They realized that really, they were in huge trouble. And they look at Nadav and Avihu and says, look, they did something wrong and they were in trouble and they didn't get out of it. We were in trouble too, but we somehow got out of it. There was trouble. And that's what kapara means. And therefore, says the Meshech Chochmah, this brings us to the third pasuk, where Moshe says to Aaron, I will be sanctified through those who are nearest to me. Bikrovai ekadesh, vel pnei ha'am ekabed, vayidom Aaron. What does this mean? It's causational, the relationship between this pasuk. It's, I will be sanctified through those who are nearest to me, and by doing so, I will be honored before the entire people. Because now the Jewish people know that sin is something serious, and the kapara isn't just some nice, easy antidote. It's an antidote to a poison. There was danger. What we had done was toxic, and it could have led to serious danger, as we had seen with Nadav and Avihu. And Vayidom Aaron accepted this. He didn't just say, okay, I accept what happened, but he now understood what the point of it all was. And this explanation has implications for the Jewish people. If we just go forward a little bit to Pasuk Vav, right, the 6th Pasuk, verse 6, Moses said to Aaron and to his sons Elazar and Itamar, do not leave your heads unshorn and do not rend your garments that you not die, and he become wrathful with the entire assembly. And your brethren, the entire house of Israel, shall bewail the conflagration that Hashem ignited. And what do we see? And your brethren, the entire house of Israel, shall bewail the conflagration that Hashem ignited. They're supposed to be in mourning. But why are they supposed to be in mourning? At the end of the day, if Nadav and Avihu did something wrong, they had violated the law, right? And therefore they were punished. What does that have to do with me? But the point is, that's at the center of this whole episode. Because the reason why Nadav and Avihu died was in order to teach the Jewish people a lesson that they may have very well misunderstood. And therefore, Nadav and Avihu were almost taken as a korban to bring this point out. And as a result, there was a need for mourning, because it's happened in a way because it represented a shortcoming on the part of the Jewish people, because they're worried about their abusing the concept of kapara, and therefore Nadav and Avihu died. And if they hadn't needed this, then maybe Nadav and Avihu wouldn't have had to die. And therefore, vayivku et hasrefa, that's an amazing explanation. And just as a final point, what's amazing about this is we actually see this related to on Yom Kippur, the Avodat Yom Kippurim. Very interestingly, the Torah reading begins with Achrei Mot with a reference to Nadav and Avihu, and our question is why, right? It's one thing for Achrei Mot to discuss Nadav and Avihu for partial reasons, whatever they are, but on Yom Kippur, on the Chagim, we generally just go straight to the Avodah. We cut to the chase, right? We don't kind of give background information. We just go straight into the relevant Torah portion for that day, right? And the relevant portion for the day of Yom Kippur is the Avodas Yom Kippurim. That makes sense. So why are the first words we hear about in the Torah reading about Nadav and Avihu? And yet, with this explanation of the Meshech Chochmah, we can understand very well. That's because on Yom Kippur, what are we looking for? We're looking for kapara, for things that we did wrong. And at the end of the day, we'll be okay, hopefully, if everything goes right. But then that can lead to the misunderstanding that was that we were in danger of misunderstanding back at the time of the Hakamat Mishkan. We had been forgiven for the sin of the Chet Egel, so everything was fine to begin with. No, none of you had to die for that. So too here with Yom Kippur, even though it's far away, we have the possibility of misunderstanding the severity of the affairs that we had done throughout the year. And as a result, we open with Nadav and Avihu so that such a korban would not be required again. Shabbat Shalom.